Just entering into the session, so we'll give this just a couple of seconds while they all join. Thank you all for being here today. Again, we're going to get started in just a few seconds as soon as we admit a number of those waiting in the lobby. Okay. Well, welcome. My name is Sherry Capel, and I am an evangelist here at Litera. I am so excited to bring you this programming today. It is the launch of a series of sessions we are going to provide to the ILTA community as part of our strategic business partnership relationship with all of you about the transitions and changes that are coming with many of our applications. I need very much to announce that the suggestions for this session and who's presenting today, the content we're providing, all of it came from feedback from all of you. And so we hope we hit the mark, and we also hope that you have brought your questions and engagement today. What we do want to let you know is that this session is, in fact, a confidential presentation to those of you who are Litera customers. Certainly, whatever we share with you today, you can share with your own colleagues, but not anything outside of your organization, and we thank you for your compliance. A few housekeeping details before we begin. As you all enter, you will be muted. We are recording our webinar today. At the close of the session, give us some time, and we'll be sending you all a link that you can share with your colleagues internally to this webinar recording. We'll also send emails to address any unanswered questions we have during this session. It's going to last 60 minutes, including the Q&A. And throughout, please queue up your questions in that little Q&A area that you see at the top of the screen. We may not, and we probably will not, answer all your questions in this session, but as I said, we're going to send you an email with a PDF attached that has all of the answers to any unanswered questions we can't cover during the session. Now, here is our agenda. You know, you all asked very much for us to bring our experts to bear today, and that's who we brought. My colleague Randy Agate and I are going to talk about why Litera Compare and how it is that you can share with your users what the benefits of making this change are. Then we're going to have our Jack Nagrodsky, who is our solutions architect. He's going to talk about some best practices for implementation and configuration. And he and Melissa Newbert, who leads our support organization, technical support organization, they're going to share with you the top 5, most often asked questions in support around Litera Compare. Then we have Lisa and Lisa. They are going to talk about some of the vocabulary transitions, give you some tools for the trade. And we are privileged to bring with us one of our customers who's already implemented Litera Compare to share with us her stories, Stacy Ost from Parker Poe. Finally, I can't tell you how many resources we have put together for tools. In fact, there's some new ones we're going to get to share with you today. So please, again, queue up all your questions. We're going to take them at the end. And with that, Randy, we are going to go ahead and get started. Perfect. So Randy, I told everyone who's on our session today that that I wanted to bring you to explain this piece of the transition to Litera Compare, because every time I'm in a session with you, you always do this great job of explaining why we've made these transitions, what that process was like, and some of the decisions and things that we had to do. So with that, I was really hoping you could take us down, I don't want to say memory lane because it's all so real now, but just take us through that process. Why Litera Compare, and how did we make that transition?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to do so. I think whenever I go into this process here, I always like to share a few key pieces that are critical. And I think it is pretty funny to go down memory lane, though it is worthwhile to do so. It's often beneficial to look at the history that Litera has taken over the last call it 7, 8 years now at this point of Microsystems acquiring Litera, then Workshare, Docs Corp, obviously a variety of other acquisitions that have taken place along this time. But those early on ones initially brought in some duplicative software to an extent in both the comparison and even metadata space. The intent of these acquisitions was always to build a best in breed single comparison application here. The goal was never to fully support multiple comparison applications. However, we did have key themes in mind along this process to ensure that we were bringing over a comparison application that would be beneficial to everyone and not just what Litera thought would be beneficial here. Whenever we do an acquisition, there's always some key themes that come into mind here. We look at a variety of items here, but 3 of them always jump out to me, especially when there's duplicative software. It's all around, performance in regards to both CPU and memory usage. How is this application going to perform here? If we're going to be building out a new comparison application or building off of something new, we want to make sure that we're picking one that is going to perform at the most optimal requirements that we would want to see from that perspective there. On top of that, we also care about quality of results. So we're throwing thousands of documents at these comparison applications here to understand what's producing the best quality results here to allow us to actually feel that this would be the beneficial product to push out to our customers. And then the biggest piece here, especially when we have duplicative software and we're choosing one as the go forward to build off of in the future, is scalability. We want to ensure, obviously, that everyone has all the features that they know and love in their current applications. But we also want to look at what product has the majority of those today. What Workshare Compare and Docs Corp and ChangePro have that we could say this is the go forward, and we'll actually include additional applications on what is also the easiest to be able to bring over those additional pieces of functionality there. So a variety of key pieces that come to mind when I often talk about this slide here. Did want to display it for you all to be able to visualize, but always like to at least give it some additional input.
Well, Randy, thanks. I think transition might not be the right word. It's a bit of a transformation. And so how did we choose Litera Compare as our go forward product? And what are some of the capabilities that will benefit everyone?
Yeah, obviously a variety of capabilities and obviously it's some of the pieces there of what I spoke to early on of the how and the why we chose this. But one of the biggest ones that often gets overlooked is really the advances of the Microsoft Office and feature set that they have going on and will continue to progress into the future there. A lot of that has to do around the ability for the go forward product being Litera Compare to be able to compare down to the XML rather than an RTF conversion having to take place. As we move into the future, applications that get introduced into Microsoft will rely heavily on the docx format, not the .doc. We are in a space now with Litera Compare where we can compare straight to the XML, allows for optimal performance to exist, and allows us to actually progress our products into the future there. So that's always a big piece that comes into mind there. When it comes to why Litera Compare for the go forward product as well too, it was the easiest one to be able to say, hey, this has the majority of functionality that all the previous applications had. It's also going to be the one that we can actually bring and insert new functionality into the easiest while making that transition there. This slide here, there's a variety of feature sets that we believe are at a state of feature parity here, but a few of the key ones that stand out to me were things like redline pages, where I have a 500-page redline, but there's only 3 pages in there that actually have changes there, where I could just fire that one out the door. Things like intelligent table comparison, where ChangePro actually held the patent on this, which made us easy to be able to say, well, this is just going to come with the go forward product there, and even things like clipboard compare and selective compare. So a few things always just to point out for the why and the how and what the top feature parity actually looks like.
Essentially, what you're saying is that no matter where you're coming from, you're going to be getting features that the other legacy applications, really enjoyed. So I feel like it's a win for everyone. And so with that, Randy, if you could briefly go through what are the benefits to the end users. So those are all of the benefits to the organization. What are the benefits to the individual end users?
Absolutely. Now, the first one that always stands out to me is just an improved user experience here. One of the neat pieces about Litera Compare is that it is built off of several different comparison applications that we've had today. So the feature sets that your users know and love can be accessed with inside of there, while being able to also experience a very similar experience. Litera Compare is actually capable of being able to have different presentation views for how someone would actually want to view their initial comparison set. Oftentimes we heard from users of Workshare Compare, hey, I prefer to actually be able to see my original modified and red line in one view here, where Litera Compare on default just shows me the red line at one take. The neat piece about it is that it doesn't have to. It can actually almost be a mirror image to how Workshare Compare displays its red line for end users as well. So an improved user experience, while also providing the option to say, if there's a way that you still prefer to view your red line, we can actually go back to that as well. Increased functionality is another big piece too. As we start consolidating these applications and bringing over the core pieces of functionality, well, someone that was using ChangePro initially may be able to gain access to a Workshare Compare feature that they didn't have access to before, or if someone was using compareDocs, they'd be able to gain access to a piece of functionality that a ChangePro user was utilizing here. And then as we go forward into this area, all future innovation being done on this product too will allow us to actually bring in new feature sets as well, outside of just what previously existed in the applications. Enhanced performance is a massive one here, and this goes a little bit off the theme along the XML comparisons and no longer having to convert to RTF. The RTF conversion rate is often very large compared to us just being able to compare directly to the XML. With us now being able to compare it to the XML, that means your end users that are comparing 100, 200, 300, even 500 plus page comparisons are going to be able to get those comparisons and those red lines generated for them far faster than they would have to do if there was an RTF conversion that would have to take place. And this last piece here, just streamline product offerings. And I've mentioned this a few times now. We're innovating off one singular product rather than having to maintain several other comparison applications. I think it often gets overlooked how much work goes into this from a product management and development perspective on these tools, but we are fully supporting 3 full development teams on these applications here, and now we're allowing them to just solely focus on one app going into the future. It's why we strongly encourage all of our users to upgrade to the latest versions here, and I'll throw in a big plug just to say, only 3% of our users are on the latest version of Litera Compare here. That is very low, and I would love to see that number increase into the future here. Our development teams work very hard on being able to provide these offerings to you, especially as we start to focus in on just one piece rather than multiple individual areas here. So I always like to at least add a plug in there. This last piece that I just want to mention here is just key benefits to the end users here. I believe there's a variety that we could list off here, but a few of them that I always just like to speak briefly to are the one-to-many comparison options, where I have one document that I can compare against 5 different versions. Being able to focus in on comments as well too, rather than having to have these comparisons viewed in potentially obscured ways. Also being able to support a variety of different document types, not just solely focus in on word comparisons, and then also providing the clipboard comparison options here. With that, I believe we're transitioning to the next set, where I'll pass it over to my colleague, Jack Nagrotsky and Melissa Newbert.
Awesome. Thanks, Randy. Hi, everybody. Jack Nagrotsky here, and we're going to be going with Melissa next to me. We're going to be going into some technical exploration of Litera Compare. And really where we're going to start with this is kind of getting your head in the right space for when you start thinking about going through implementation and configuration of Litera Compare. So you can kind of see I have 6 bullet points here that are in some nice pretty colors, and those are kind of the topics of where your head kind of should be thinking about as you start to deploy this. And right off the bat, the first big one that you're going to want to think about is that one master machine where you're going to do your configurations on. And you would be using the Litera Administrative Panel, sometimes also known as LAP, to do this configuration. It's not something you need to install on multiple machines. Best practice is to have it on one, do your configuration, and that gives you the basis to deploy those files out to your users when you go through implementation. Now, one of the questions that always comes up about the administrative panel is all the different settings that are in there. Now, out of the box, I would say, things are already configured out of the box for you. There's 5 or 10% changes that you may need to make, but a lot of those settings would be directed by somebody on Melissa's team to change a particular setting as you're going through that implementation. We are working on actually having a document that details all those different settings, just so there's a reference for it. That's to come down the road here. And then the other big thing, as we get into these file locations, everything you do in the administrative panel, it's stored in this particular location, the program data Litera folder. And in that folder, that's where all the important files for Litera Compare will live. Whether it's settings that you configure and tailor within the administrative panel, your DMS settings and integration is also stored in that program data Litera folder, as well as the comparison styles or rendering sets. We call them compare styles in the application, also can be known as rendering sets there. But really, this is the master location for your configuration. That's what you would take and package and deploy out to your end users when you install the application. Now, with that main kind of master or enterprise location, there's also some user files that can come into play. So as we talk about enterprise styles or corporate styles versus individual personal styles, if you give that ability to your users, those files are actually going to live in the roaming Litera folder for you. And things like their personal styles, if they're allowed to create them, would be listed there. Any user customizations, maybe it's slight tweaks that they have in the application that they've made would be stored there. And even user settings, so whether or not you like certain layouts or certain size of the particular windows in the application, those are all stored in that roaming/Litera folder there. And then when it comes to some of the other settings that can be a little unique to Compare, there's always those desktop shortcuts that come along with the application. You do have the ability to have those created or not. There's a little file that that comes with the download package. It's an INI file. It's very detailed, very straightforward, but allows you just to enable or disable those shortcuts that get installed on the desktop there. And as long as that file's in the same directory as the install, as the Windows installer, it'll be read and picked up, which segues perfectly into deployments here. So we have the standard local or graphical interface deployment that you can go through, where you can click next and enter the appropriate information. We also have the silent switches that you could pass through a command line. And it's also very similar for something like SCCM or AppSense, something that you use to package up the application and deploy it to users. And what's nice is you just use those silent switches or parameters that are used in the command line for those types of applications. It's really straightforward. Not much you have to do outside of reading some of the details that you'll notice on some of these pages here. So as I'm going through this, hopefully everybody's noticed that there are some page numbers next to some of these items here. And you can see it down at the bottom. I wanted to reference the install and configuration guide, so that way you had a point of reference for more details when it comes to these particular focus areas as you go through this. When it comes to those comparison styles, like I said, we have two flavors: the corporate or enterprise styles that would be tailored and pushed out to your users, and then the ability to have personal styles as well. It's some firms may lock it down, so that way users can only use the corporate styles that are available, or they'll open it up to give the flexibility for the users to create their own styles or rendering sets that they can leverage in their comparisons. And then the big one when it comes to thinking about all of this is the DMS integration here. And especially as we're talking about NetDocuments and iManage with being more cloud ready there, there's a few things to keep in mind when it comes to that DMS integration. As you're going through and configuring Litera Compare with the administrative panel. You want to ensure that that client DMS is installed prior, so that way the application pick up on the particular DMS that you're using. And when it comes to something like I Manage Work 10, there is a component that you can leverage called Litera I Manage Extension Service, or LIMES. And this enables the right-click functionality in the web. So that way you can be in your I Manage Work 10 browser, right-click on the particular files you want, and have them populated into Litera Compare. We have a couple of different flavors of it depending on your particular setup, but we have hosted and on-premise. The other thing to mention when you're going through this is that in your iManage ribbon that is in Word, there is a compare button that's there. And some users are in that workflow. They like to leverage that button. With Litera Compare, you can actually take that over. So that way the comparison's done through Litera Compare. And lastly, when it comes to net documents, a little bit simpler of a enablement there. You just have to log into the web portal of net documents to enable that external application of Litera Compare to get that right-click functionality. And I think that's everything I wanted to cover today. I hope I didn't miss anything, Melissa. But what have we got for some of the top questions and support?
Yeah, thanks, Jack. Thanks for everybody being here. So top 5 support questions for Litera Compare in no particular order. So number 1, as Jack went through some of the configuration stuff, so deploying the configurations out to your end users. So sometimes what we get in support is, hey, I've deployed my files and something's not right. They're either not changing or updating. So some of the things that we recommend that you do is make sure when you're deploying that if you're deploying a second time, that you're removing some of the customization files in some of those other locations. So typically we recommend that people delete or overwrite, if you prefer, the files that are in the program data, the local and the roaming file locations. This is going to help make sure that the proper files get in place and that we don't have any confusion when ChangePro is out there or Litera Compare is out there reading those customizations. So that's one of the things. And then in the advanced settings, I think Jack has touched on this too. In the documentation, the advanced settings are things that you don't necessarily want to go in there and change unless you're guided by a technician. Now, there are some useful things that everybody can use. Some of them are more specific to different environments. We are working on a guide, so that is to come to help you guys with it. But one of the big things that we do mention with configuration is keeping that as a tip is to keep a standard out-of-the-box set of those customized files for quick troubleshooting. Just keep those handy in a separate location and keep your old set, take your new set, do your master file, but keep that old set handy. It helps in troubleshooting and helps not spend a lot of time in investigation. Another quick tip a lot of people overlook is in the admin panel at the very top ribbon, you're going to see this tools. It's kind of hidden, wish they make it a little bit more pronounced, but that little tool will help you compare your customized files. So while customized files aren't exported, so you can go through and see everything you need to change, you can compare 2 sets. So that comes in handy a lot of times as well. So if we go on to the next slide to number 2, we'll talk about that today. So number 2 is our rendering styles. Jack touched on that as well. So rendering styles is inside the application. And what is my red line going to look like once I run the red line? You can customize those rendering styles. So we have 2 sets. You've got your corporate, and then you have your personal. As Jack mentioned, personal may not be something that you guys turn on for your end users. Some firms do, some firms don't. They want to just stick with that corporate style so everything looks consistent. It's easier to troubleshoot and it's easier to train on. But again, we allow for that personal style. So corporate styles are stored in that main Litera folder under program data, but then your personal styles is in the roaming location. And some of the things that we find that people do when they're trying to work with these is The first one is there's a different format for each of our modules. So when you go into the admin panel, if you look on your desktop when you install it for the first time, you're going to see four icons actually. You're going to have one for Word, one for Excel, one for PowerPoint, and one for our PDF. So those each have their own extension. I've labeled them here. It's also in the guide. But sometimes people just change the extension. But you really can't do that because it corrupts the file and doesn't really work past that. So we recommend that you go inside of Litera Compare application and make any changes to those rendering sets that you want to do within the application. Again, renaming the style, a lot of times what we do is somebody won't like the name, they want to change the name, they'll right click, they'll try to change the name, it corrupts the file, it doesn't work. Go inside of the application and update the name. There is a rename feature in there as well. Some of the tricks and trips here is, again, keep a default set. A default set are standard, and that's what we're going to use in support. We're going to compare with the default set, and then we're going to take your style and put it in place and see what comes out different. It helps us pinpoint that little area that may make a difference in what you're having some challenges with. So it's handy to keep a default set. It's also handy not to really use the default set that we send out and then tweak that and then push it out to your end users, because now really it's not a default set. So sometimes a naming convention, some people use a different naming convention like your firm's name default so that they have a default set. But from a troubleshooting standpoint, you can always go back to that default from that master machine, run it on that and see if that makes a difference. Another cool tip, try not to use symbols in your naming convention. Sometimes we see that it causes some strange behavior and sometimes doesn't work. So it's good to avoid using symbols. And if we go on to the next, number 2 on our list of issues, DMS integrations. Again, Jack's done most of the work here. I don't really have a whole lot on it, but as far as in the admin panel, a lot of times, depending on the DMS that you choose, you're going to get different options. So if I choose iManage, I'm going to see different options to choose. If I choose NetDocs, I'm going to see different options to choose. It also controls your save functionality. So a lot of times I'll have people say, well, I'm missing this and I can't get to it, and it's because they've chose a different DMS or they moved from a different firm and came over, and a different firm may use a different DMS, so then that causes some challenges. Just some heads up when you're doing the DMS integration that it is active in both sections of the admin panel. And then number 3, we've got installation. Again, Jack did a great job talking about installation. Some of the things that we see in support is, how do I get the license key to work in the install? It is a particular, you have to say license key in there equals the license number. Sometimes it used to be license name and then the license number. So all of that has changed a little bit. So those of you who are familiar with Change Pro, which has really been relabeled as Litera Compare, that's going to be a major difference. And we see people kind of get confused there in that new license structure. Silent install, we have progress bars, all the ways that you can think of installing an application we pretty much have, and it's detailed in our installation guide. But we get a lot of questions on that in support too, as well as disable and add-ins, the ILTA, all of that are switches and parameters outlined in our guide. If we move on to number 4, we're going to talk about comparison results. This is a huge one, right? So a lot of people coming from Workshare Compare, compareDocs that used to convert to RTF in the past, kind of different in Litera Compare. So Litera Compare reads the XML data. Randy talked about it in the beginning. It's going to enhance your performance. So when you change the way that you run the comparison and what does the comparison work with, you might get some different results in the way of, hey, RTF, the document compared perfect, but when I compare here in Litera Compare, it's not working, something's different. And it's because of that different focus on the XML data that we have to go into and investigate and look for. So you might see some changes there, but the enhanced performance is well worth it. And if we move on to number 5, we're going to talk about license key. So this is another big difference for every application. So from Change Pro to Workshare to compareDocs, all of you guys are used to using registry keys that were specific expiration dates. Change Pro and compareDocs had a license key with a specific expiration date. We heard you. We know that it's hard to deploy and change that license key each and every time. So we've come up with that simple key code. Doesn't expire. It actually works off the activation subscription in the background. So as long as you have an active subscription with us, you no longer have to deploy new license keys each and every year. And that's it. That's pretty much support and what we get the most common questions. So I'm going to turn it over to getting comfortable with Litera Compare.
Hi, this is Lisa Erdman. Yeah. So to start, excuse me, so that you got two Lisas coming at you for this. So our first thing is configuration and moving to the Litera Compare slide. And I forgot to turn my camera on, so we'll turn that on now. There are some key items for configuration. PDF desktop shortcut. Many clients remove the Compare for PDF shortcut to avoid user confusion. They found that running the PDF comparison directly from Compare for Word is an easier workflow because it provides the options to OCR and to run a side-by-side comparison. This allows a user to make that decision as the comparison is being launched. Running a comparison from PDF Compare directly will only offer the side-by-side comparison. To make this change, you can reference customizing desktop shortcuts in the installation guide. I referenced the page number there for you. But most important is that the file must be saved as a zip file and placed in the same folder with the MSI file prior to starting the installation. If this is not done, the installer will not pick up the changes that you have made in the INI. Next, there are three key configurations for Litera Compare that are changed in the Litera admin panel. Redline editing in Word is currently the default, but is no longer functional in newer versions. We are making this change, but until then, you should change allow redline editing to false and allow redline editing in Word to true. The next one is save redline pages. This will enhance the user experience for creating redline page only comparisons. This setting is already enabled in email redline pages changes. This will then allow the user to save as well. Lastly, optimize PDF performance. This setting fixes some PDF compare issues, so we recommend that this setting is turned on, and you would just set it to true.
Okay, next up, vocabulary. You're going to be hearing some new terms. On the left are the terms you'll be using in Litera Compare. So styles are called rendering sets in both Workshare Compare and Litera Compare. You may hear the term rendering styles also. So the rendering styles, rendering sets, interchangeable, they're all the same thing. So along this same lines, Litera Compare has corporate styles. These are the standard styles that get deployed firm-wide and are called global rendering sets in compareDocs. In Litera Compare, there are redline pages. These are called changes only in compareDocs and redline pages with changes in Workshare Compare. LAP is an acronym for Litera Admin Panel, and you'll hear that a lot. And this is the tool that is used for a standard configuration to be deployed firm-wide. In compareDocs, that tool is Configuration Manager. And in Workshare Compare, you select the Configuration Manager admin mode. And lastly, switch. So Litera Compare switch is used if you want to switch the original and modified files. And it's called switch in compareDocs, but it's called swap in Workshare Compare. And back to Lisa.
Okay, so there are a few key points when moving from Workshare Compare to Litera Compare. First, with the user interface, the selection dialog box. This appears when Workshare Compare is launched. Instead of the selection dialog box, you are now going to choose files directly from the ribbon. And then there's comparison mode, and this is also on the selection dialog box, and it is no longer needed since Litera Compare has only one comparison mode. It's like Workshare's fast mode. If a text-only comparison is needed, you can configure this in the rendering style. For user configuration, in Workshare Compare, the configuration manager user mode, users were able to go in and make, some changes on the way that they wanted to view within the product. Now they just go into file settings within Compare. Next, for configuration changes, floating panel versus full screen. In Workshare Compare, there was a full screen view of the product, which consisted of the ribbon and the work area where the comparison is displayed. By default, Litera Compare is a floating panel, which is just the ribbon. For Compare for Word and PowerPoint, you can change this in the LAP. I have provided you with the location of the setting in the LAP on the screen. For Compare for Excel, you don't need to do anything. It's already in a full screen mode. Rendering sets need to be reconfigured. Workshare Compare rendering sets, they don't switch over. One is a .set file, and you're going to XML files now. So in Workshare Compare, the rendering sets were built in the configuration manager. In Litera Compare, this is done within each of the products, Compare for PowerPoint, Excel, and Word, and you go in and you create edit styles on the ribbon, and that will take care of it. So each individual product. There are some great enhancements for the move to Litera Compare. Save as PPT and PPTX. This was requested by many Workshare Compare clients, and now with Litera Compare, this is available. Additionally, many clients asked for the ability to show insertions and deletions on the same slide. This is now available also in Workshare Compare. You had insertions on one slide and deletions on another, so it's more condensed, easier, on the user. Easier deployment. So with Litera Compare, deployment is just much easier because the configuration is done through XML files. In Workshare Compare, you had those registry keys and then they had to be deployed. Many clients have commented on how this has been a positive impact on their deployment process. Lastly, expired file types. The file types listed on the screen, WDF, WPF, WCFP, they have been sunset and they will not work in Litera Compare. It is recommended that you scan through your DMS for any of these file types, as they will not be accessible after the transition. And back to you, Lisa.
Okay. So key points when moving to Litera Compare from compareDocs. So the user interface, in compareDocs, you selected the document output you wanted. PDF, Word, Excel, or PowerPoint. With Litera Compare, the comparison will run and open into Litera Compare interface, and that's where you can accept and reject any changes. Then you select the document output that you want to save the comparison in. So along to include. So in compareDocs, there are checkboxes in the interface where you can include the summary, detail, and changes only reports before the comparison is run. So these are now available inside Litera Compare interface after the comparison is run. So the 3-pane view with compareDocs, your options are 3-pane view or the comparison output, opening to Word or PDF. Litera Compare offers many different layouts to view the original, modified, and redline in its interface. So configuration. In compareDocs, the global rendering sets are configured from within the configuration manager and then deployed. In Litera Compare, these are known as a corporate style and are configured within Litera Compare, not the LAP. These will need to be reconfigured when upgrading to Litera Compare, as well as any personal rendering sets. They will also need to be reconfigured. They don't come over.
So enhancements. With compareDocs, your options are the 3-pane view or the comparison output. You can view the different layouts in the original, modified, or red line. And you'll notice an increase in the performance and stability of Litera Compare. So sunset, compareDocs checks in with the central config location every 24 hours to see if there are any updates to the configuration. This involves updating XML in the central config with a versioning value. So now if you want to do any updates within Litera Compare, you just simply push out the updated configuration via GPO. And lastly, the compareDocs Configuration Manager executable is included with the standard compareDocs install. So the LAP is a separate install. And we recommend only installing the LAP on machines that will be administrators of Litera Compare in your organization. And I'm passing it on to, oh, that's right, Stacy.
Hi, how are you, Lisa?
Hi.
Hey, everybody. How are we doing?
So Stacy and I have worked together to deploy Litera Compare, and they were on compareDocs. And so she's here to discuss how that transition went. So first question, what phase of the migration are you in?
Hey, so first, thanks for having me today. I'm happy to be here. We are at the end of a pilot program, and it's been a 4-month pilot for a couple of reasons. One is competing deadlines, other projects that we have here. I'm sure no one here has any concept of that, right? Different things that need your attention. We wanted to give ourselves time to find and develop champions. And we currently have about 30 people who are using it. And that is a mix of both attorneys and secretaries. And if I can mention, why did we decide to make the move from compareDocs to Litera Compare? We were getting a lot of more complex documents. Some of our practice groups were seeing an influx in more complex documents. There were more sophisticated requirements for documents coming from our clients, and we were not getting the desired results from compareDocs. So at the same time that we're seeing that, Litera announced the obsolescence policy for compareDocs, so we were aware of that. And then Parker Poe became a Litera desktop customer. And during that time, we saw the dedicated team that we'd have to support us while we were configuring and while we were implementing Litera desktop. And so we said, you know what? Let's go for it. We thought Litera Compare is low-hanging fruit, right? People already know how to compare documents. It should be an easy switch. It'd be a quick, easy way to get a lot of our folks on board with the new entire Litera Compare desktop. Our DMS is I manage Work 10 on-prem, not cloud. And as far as migration goes, we do anticipate a firm-wide deployment of Litera Compare come July of 2023. So coming fast.
Awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
And what lessons did you learn?
Well, there's been a bunch. The first I can say is truly the proof is in the pudding. Okay, the product works. Let it work. Let it speak for itself. I like to say this is sort of going from a Kia to a Benz. All right, a loaded Benz. Yeah, a Kia is going to get you from A to B, but you're going to have a richer feature set. It's going to get you there faster. It's customizable. Litera Compare is a superior product to what we had, and our customers recognize that quickly. Little learning curve. It just chews through documents. And look, I'm not a paid public spokesperson for Litera Compare. Okay, I promise. It just works. It just works. It does what it says it's going to do. We continually are advocating and sharing how compatible Litera Compare is with our customers' workflow. So for example, someone in our pilot might say, hey, something's not working or not working the way they expected it to in Litera Compare. So I went back and I compared it with compareDocs. So then it's our job to figure out why that happened, and then let's find a solution, and then let's customize what we've got in Litera Compare to make sure that we're giving a similar experience with Litera Compare. And we have seen, how easy it is to use, both from our end customer and from an administrative perspective. I have some members of my team on this call: John Bellich, Kathy Simmons, their IT apps, Cynthia Mott's my co-trainer. We've all seen this, how easy it is to use. Lessons learned, here's the biggest one. And Lisa, I'm glad you're here. If you're going to implement Litera Compare, rely on your solutions engineer. Okay, they are there for you and to help you. Lisa has been my right hand. She's helped us connect the dots. She's made settings recommendations. She's mentioned, well, this is what other firms have done, which we always want to know, right? She's helped us troubleshoot when we've gotten unexpected results when it comes to comparisons. Lisa's my yogi, my guide on the side. She's my Ted Lasso without the mustache.
Thank you, Stacy.
Oh,
and last but not least, how are you encouraging adoption of Litera Compare?
So Cynthia Mott, as I mentioned, my co-trainer, and I, we are the primary contacts for our pilot users. And we provide them an extremely high priority response. So that's number one. To encourage this adoption, and especially for the pilot group, we said we'll leave compareDocs installed so that if you have something highly time critical and you don't get the compare results you're expecting with Litera Compare, you can always go back and rerun it in compareDocs. So we felt that's going to increase their comfort level. Now, once we do a firm-wide deployment, compareDocs is going to go away. So they'll get notice and they'll be told, let's say 30 days from X, compareDocs is going to be uninstalled. So that will force everyone to fully onboard and fully integrate with Litera Compare. And we'll tell people that this is due to the obsolescence policy of compareDocs, right? We're not making that up. It really is going away. What Cynthia and I did was we recorded our training sessions. We started with all the Litera training content. We customized it to match our firm's styles, the default, the global style set. We put it all in our LMS, so it's available for everyone. And then we let people alone. We just let them use the product. We let them simmer. We let them steep, and they're doing great. They're quiet. Isn't that like the number one thing? If you're not hearing, complaints, they're quiet. They love it. And the other reason that I can tell it's working is they will tell other people, and then Cynthia and I will get calls from others saying, can I get in this pilot program? So we've sort of built up this feeling of exclusivity, and it's word of mouth. And the people who are using it love it. And so when it's time for firm-wide deployment in July, I will have no problem getting testimonials, cheerleaders to sort of help pave the way. So
Great.
sort of all those things.
Thank you, Stacy. Really appreciate you being on here with us. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, back to you.
Thank you, Stacy and Lisa, and the other Lisa. I wanted to now make sure to share with you all some resources, but before we show that slide, make certain, please, that you click on that Q&A button, because we have this entire team here to help us answer your questions. So without further ado, let's go ahead and showcase a few of the resources that we have to help you in this transition. I also want to mention that as we do our additional transitions to newer versions of our applications, we're going to follow a very similar model to this, where we've got, documentation that outlines what are the reasons why. We have feature matrix parallels, so you can see where we are in the parity, matching parity from legacy applications. In addition, a transition guide that will help those of you who are working in similar roles to Stacy. Also around comparing Excel and PowerPoint and Word, of course. Then we have individual matrices that talk about coming from either compareDocs or Workshare, and webinars that talk about those too. All of these are on demand. Now, that live training edition is beginning at the end of this month. This is a brand new offering. It will be staffed with our solutions engineers. That bi-weekly live end user training also is launching. And so make sure that you sign up for that you let your customer success manager know your feedback on it. And make sure that all helps you. As a matter of fact, I want to point out something special about that live training. If you are not working with a solutions engineer, in other words, you are upgrading this in much the same way you have over the last several years of working with these applications, this is the thing that you need to attend, because you will have access to those engineers. And clearly, as Melissa pointed out, you have access to our support organization, but often they can't really give you those kinds of recommendations that the actual solutions engineer implementing this with dozens of other firms, they can't necessarily give you those nuanced recommendations in a 15-minute support call. And so as a consequence, we're covering this on both sides, the live training for that, and then of course our support access and all of these videos and webinar links that will help you maintain confidence in going forward on Litera Compare. So with that, we are now going to queue up questions and answers, and I would really love for all of my Litera colleagues to join. In fact, Stacy, if you can even join, I'm sure that the audience may have a couple questions for you. And at this point, Lainey, let's see what questions we have. Oh, I see one. There is, I believe this is Sue. She says that they are a Workshare customer presently. Should they be starting their pilot testing of Litera Compare? Randy, maybe you take that because you did the timeline with me. So I think that's a good question for you.
The short answer would be yes. The little bit longer answer would still be absolutely to begin testing right away. I think one of the neat pieces for Workshare users in particular, early on when the decision was that we would build off of Workshare at one point, we actually started bringing over functionality that should look very similar to Litera Compare for what it is today. We started migrating buttons over that were similar to Litera Compare, so there should be a similar end user experience from that point. But I would strongly encourage anyone that has not downloaded Litera Compare yet to begin testing it.
All right, thank you. Equally, and again, Stacy, there is a question I wanted to ask you from the audience. You are moving from compareDocs to Litera Compare, and what is the feedback that the lawyers are giving you about using that tool and some of the, think of it as getting more sophisticated work product that they seem to be getting? And you had shared with us some feedback they had. I thought you might want to answer this gal's question.
Yes, one of our more senior attorneys, when we presented it to her, the first thing she said was, "Oh, this is what the big boys use." So they know, they're aware of it. They know that this product is out there, right? They know that there's other, products they could use. And she'd heard this word, that it was being used and that it was a little more sophisticated than what we had.
Okay, thank you. And Jack, I have a question for you. Someone from our audience has asked about, today we compare on the desktop, right? The big sort of client that, people are working on. So will Litera Compare permit them ultimately to do things with a little less footprint and or on any kind of device?
Yes. As we've all probably been well aware of how Microsoft is pushing people to get off the old Visto and ComAdmin model. We're going down that route, obviously, with M365 apps. So we have the ability with the Litera Compare M365 app to allow you to compare from a mobile device, Word Online, to give you that flexibility to at least get a comparison completed and done that you can review from wherever you are. So it's the step in the direction of being more web accessible and more flexible to your workflow and where you're working. And it's proven to be very beneficial and even as a complement to Litera Compare, because you never know where you are when you need to do a comparison.
Understood. And I'm not certain whether this is for one of the Lisas or not, or maybe even Melissa, but the question comes from the fact that there was in that timeline that Randy showed, the audience member is asking about that Q4, after Q4 2023, that is the end of supportability on compareDocs and on Workshare. But Melissa, that's not the, there's between now and then, there's probably going to be another release and that's the question. How often do we release releases of Litera Compare?
Great question. So the Litera Compare release schedule is quarterly. So we'll do it at the end of every quarter. Might not be that month, and maybe the beginning of the following month. But yeah, it's on a quarterly basis. So we're at June. We just released 11.4. So we'll have another release in June, July, August, and then again, probably end up in January. So we are cognizant that people don't, over the holidays and things like that, they don't have time to test or whatnot. So probably the first part of that January timeframe in 2024 will be our Q4 release schedule.
Perfect. So that cadence actually helps the other gal who said about Workshare, should she start her pilot, right? You could absolutely get on board for that. So Lisa Hansen, I have a question for you from Frank. Does Litera Compare have built-in OCR like compareDocs did?
Oh, yes, definitely. And you can compare PDF to Word, Word to PDF. Yes, same exact thing. You don't have to worry about OCRing. Definitely.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank our audience for attending today. We hope that you have found this useful in this particular moment and those ahead. And I want to thank all of my colleagues and Stacey Ost who joined us today to bring this programming to you. We're interested in your feedback. We're interested in your additional questions. Make sure that when we send you the links for those resources, you attend that live training, you download what's there, keep watch on it, talk with your customer success manager about any updates to all of that. But we thank you so much for joining us today. And look forward to another transition series programming in the upcoming future. Ooh. Okay. Well, thank you all. Randy, Jack, Lisa, Melissa, and Stacey, of course. Thanks.
Bye.
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 Bye, everybody. Thank you.